the events in Brazil, and in an approach that put its emphasis in the long term. So my focus is not the events in itself, but the process. So, and first of all, I want to answer the question put in the Roundtable call. Is it the end of a political cycle in Brazil? And my answer must contain some ambiguity due to inconclusiveness of the present situation. And I can say, as the song of the Brazilian composer Vital Farias, it's the beginning of the end, or it's the end. To make clear my answer, I must present three concepts that are at the basis of my argument: practical classism, passive revolution, and organic crisis. First, practical classism. Well, I understand practical classism as the complex range of collective sentiments, actions, and experiences that organizes a class identity in contradiction and sometimes against to bosses and governments. As a kind of popular good sense, this intricate juxtaposition of elements expresses itself in a fragmentary, incoherent, and contradictory set of political practices, such as strikes, demonstrations, unionism, and original forms of associativism. These practices can even assume radicalized forms of struggles, even though the limit of all these kinds of practical classism is always its incapacity to become a coherent worldview and to project itself in a new and alternative state form. Passive revolution, by its turn, means the actual bourgeois mode of leading molecular transformation in social and political fields, at the same time as avoiding or precluding the social radical struggle and revolution. Acting in this way, the ruling class avert the active participation of subaltern classes in the political process, displacing the subject of transformation and reinforcing the political and military state apparatus. As a combination of partially innovative and conservative elements, passive revolution became the contemporary reformist guise of the ruling class. Finally, organic crisis. This means the coincidence in an extended period of time of both the economic and political crisis. The most important effect of this coincidence is the temporary and unstable aspects acquired by the traditional forms of political rule and domination. In this situation, the ruling classes have to face the eroding, fragmenting, and cracking of the fundamentals of their power. This is why, in a process of organic crisis, it's possible to notice different forms of domination and rule succeeding each other without solving the problem for too long. So I can mobilize these three concepts in a more concrete way to understand the present situation. Born in the heart of the massive metal workers' strikes in the end of the 70s, the Workers' Party built in the 80s its hegemony on the Brazilian mass movement. This means that this party leadership, its cadres, and most important representatives were responsible for the intense development of the unions and social movements in a certain direction. It happened despite the fragmentary, incoherent, and contradictory set of collective practices that characterized the subaltern classes' activity in Brazil. Precisely for these reasons, the Workers' Party hegemony had elements of weakness in the sense that the party based its roots more in the confidence of the practical classism than in its strategically and permanent organizing issues. This explains the fact that the Workers' Party was born without a program or a common strategy. In place of that, the party was marked by its strong opposition to bosses and dictatorship, its rank-and-file radicalism, its frenetic activism. Besides that, A confident and defined behavior against the traditional politics allowed the emergence of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva as a very popular leader and its party as the most powerful organization inside unions and social movements, defeating the old bureaucratic and passive communist parties. Over the years, the character of this kind of class practice and the weakest of this form of hegemony turned against the identity of the party. Without a coherent and comprehensive worldview capable of surpass the fragmentariness that shaped its first years, the party was reabsorbed by traditional politics. The social and political pressures proper of a class-divided society became increasingly stronger as the party elected representatives, mayors, and state governors after 1988, when Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva won the presidential run in 2002, the Workers' Party didn't express even the practical classism that marked the beginning, its beginning. In power, Workers' Party expressed not a practical classism anymore, but a new form of passive revolution. During the administration of the Workers' Party, high economic growth rates have been sustained by the expansion of public debt, by massive public investment and state loans to national and international capital. The sectors that have growth more consistent were that which combined low capital intensity and high intensity of labor. This growth became stronger, especially in civil construction, food industry, and those economic activities related to agribusiness. This economic improvement led to a reversal of the trend of less formalization labor market of the previous period. A growing number of workers have been formally employed, and at a minimum, some labor rights were assured. Above this, Workers' Party built its image as a popular government. In contrast, the majority of the new formal jobs was concentrated in low-skilled occupations where the earnings are less than 3 minimum wages. In other words, the labor market became more formalized but worse in terms of labor conditions and wages. The growth of formal employment, social assistance policies, and the incredible credit rise to low-income consumers stimulated a dramatic increase in the consumption and indebtedness among workers. Also increased household investments in education and professional training, fueled by expectations of a better position in the labor market. But concomitantly, the wage levels of jobs better qualified have felt. The frustrations of the expectations in the worse paying, compounded to the decrease of wage levels in the better paying sectors of the working class, are the main core of the riots that shaked our country in the past months. In this exact moment, we can see the exacerbation of social contradictions in Brazil and the reemergence of the workers and youth mass movement in the streets. After a long withdrawal, the social opposition regained progressively the streets and the political initiative. According to the unions, in 2010, there were 446 strikes. In 2011, this number grew to 554 strikes, and in 2012, 873 strikes. The number of labor loss hours due to these strikes in 2012 was the biggest since 1991. Also, in the mega construction sectors, there were a lot of strikes and workers' protests. There were strikes with a great political and symbolic importance in the most important Brazilian soccer stadiums and hydroelectric plants. The explosion began in Jirau in 2011 with a wildcat strike that resulted in burned houses, broken machines, and terrorized bosses. Only in March of that year, 170,000 construction workers went on strike. This movement spread in 2012. In the beginning of the year, a new 10-day strike took place in Giral, and after this in Belo Monte, when workers folded their arms for 12 days. The workers of Belo Monte hydroelectric plant set back again in April 2013. As always, the repressive forces acted against the movement. The President Dilma Rousseff sent the national forces to occupy the area and subdue the movement. Paramilitary security forces at service of bosses also played this role. In the first days of the movement, 3 activists were arrested, another 3 disappeared. The national forces surrounded the main sites, blocking the workers' initiatives. And after that, a presidential decree was promulgated authorizing the national forces and the intelligence agency to investigate and arrest activists at the hydroelectric plants. In the past year, while investing in mega constructions, the Brazilian government at federal, regional, and local levels reduced the budget for public education, health, and transportation. The situation became worse with the rise of price in many services and products, the first signals that the inflation returned. A critical point was the rise of the bus fares in the major cities of the country. In the last month, a wave of youth revolt against the rises occupied the streets, first in Porto Alegre, Natal, and Goiânia, our regional capitals in Brazilian states, defeating local governments, and in June of this year, in the biggest and most important cities of Brazil. After that, inspired by this struggle and rioting against police repression, more than 1 million people gained the streets. It was not clear what these people wanted, but we can be sure that practical classism, the spontaneous subversivism of subaltern classes, has come back. The masses were fighting against local, state, and federal governments, against the false promises made by politicians and the quotidian lies of the big media corporation. It's not just for 20 cents, they keep repeating. In the last 2 months, became clear that Workers' Party lost its long leadership on the streets. In the past July 11th, the big demonstrations of June had gone, but inspired a big return of union movement to the scene in a big national strike and demonstrations day. Nor the government, nor Workers' Party or its allies could prevent it. Or practical classism had encountered the organized worker class for the first time in years. It can be compared to the beautiful rivers encounter of Rio Negro and Solimões, the only Brazil Amazon can show to the world. Until now, none was able to lead the streets and give a clear direction, and this struggle process is not at its end. This encounter remains uncertain in its development, and we could only feel its huge and wonderful potentialities. We can see now the beginning of the end, and maybe the end of Worker Party's political cycle. Thank you. Yeah. Jim first? Yeah, okay.